It's a great day here at Will to Win's Gaming YouTube channel. Will isn't here today with us, but it's because we have a guide specific on Nami. I am your host, co-host, actually, Kek Filet, aka Sage, and today I have with me Jackson Wong. How are you doing, Jackson?
I'm doing great today. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Yeah, thank you so much for stopping in with us and giving us actually a lot of guidance through Nami. This is going to be just a full playthrough guide or a deck list strategy matchup, whatever Jackson wants to talk to us about with Nami, especially in the set of OP04 and maybe even beyond. I don't know if the deck really changes much even going forward, but yeah,
Yeah, I haven't looked at any cards in the feature, but I think there are some blue cards that help it, especially like the new film live action stuff. I think some of that stuff helps it.
yeah. I think it's be really actually the film stuff isn't that bad, is it? But I don't know if there's a lot of events in there.
Right.
And I first want to say, guys, Jackson, if you haven't seen him before, you're probably living under a rock. But if this is your first time seeing him, definitely go down in the description. You have his Twitter down there. He also has a nice Patreon. He's kind of a man who doesn't really need much of an introduction because of his high success rate. How many shanks do you have now?
Zero, actually.
Zero shanks? Okay.
Yeah.
But 7 Luffy still, which is fine. So that's still
Yeah.
good.
I haven't played any events that gives us strength shit, but I'm hoping to play in some.
Do you plan any online ones like the one this weekend?
I think I am doing this one this Sunday, and it'll be my first time trying to get a Shanks.
Cool. I'll see you there, man. I'll see you there. With that, let's just jump into the actual guide. I first wanted to ask, why play Nami?
Honestly, there's a lot of reasons. One of the reasons is I thought it was like a really cool deck. I really love the alternate win condition decks where it's not just, killing your opponents by getting down to 0 life and swinging for game. Being the only alternate win condition was really attractive to me as a deck. So I played it even when it was pretty bad. Like I just tried to make it work, and then like even if I don't win, I still had a lot of fun even in the games I lost. Another reason is that it's a really strong deck in this format. Maybe not so much here compared to Japan, but we'll go over that in like other parts of this video. But yeah, it's a really strong deck in that this format, in the OP4 format, it's super slow. So a lot of slow decks out there like Queen or Katakuri or Crocodile, and Nami kind of takes advantage of that because you're being too slow, you're not aggressing enough, so then Nami can just play her game and then win on her own, compared to like in deck or in a format dominated by really strong decks and really aggressive decks like Law and Whitebeard, which we kind of still are. But yeah, and other than that, it's just, Nami is some people's favorite characters. I got my fiance to play Nami, and she loved it. So, I wanted to teach her how to play Nami, but in order to teach her how to play Nami, I had to learn how to play Nami myself.
Great. Yeah, that's actually such a great introduction to this deck, and I think a lot of people, I mean, every deck has this. It has to draw well and play well in order to win, and Nami's no real exception to that. I mean, you could call most decks solitaire in that scenario, right? Helmet Beard, etc., right? And so it's almost compared to solitaire playing Nami, but I think it is interesting to have a different win condition, and honestly, like you said, it does have really good matchups into any slow deck, which it's popular right now, right?
Right, exactly.
So yeah, I guess going into that, let's go into the deck list. We're not going to jump into any specific, we're not going to read the cards out, right? So people should probably know what all these cards do. But as far as this list goes, is there any like other side options or maybe even a different kind of strategy that you would maybe trade out any cards, or why did you kind of go with the list that looks similar to this?
Yeah, so like full disclaimer, like this is not my list. This is the list I got first in one of the OP3 Japanese championships. It's card for card, and I think a lot of people just kind of saw it, and then it's like there's nothing you can change much about it. It's a really solid list, like really good ratios. Like you see, it's 4 ups except for one card, which is a 2 up, which is the new OP04 2K counter op piece. But even that is like a really flexible spot. There's some other cards you can play. I like playing the Gum Gum Rain if you don't play the Oppice, just because it's another Impel Down card and has a great trigger to bounce back your Kaya out of life. Some other cards are the 2K counter Bond Play, kind of the same as some Gum Gum Rain. It's just searchable 2K counter, so it helps your Buggy Whip less. But other than that, there's a lot of other flexible cards you can play, like Overheat, like Nojiko or Soga King. It's really up to you and how you like to play. But I think Apis is just a generic good card to have there in that flex spot. But the other like 48 cards of the list, like I probably wouldn't even change just because it helps the deck flow really well.
Okay, got it. Yeah, I know one thing that's kind of big for this kind of deck to think about what I've seen before is Boodle. Do you have any like opinions on Boodle?
Yeah, so the only matchup where I like Boodle at all is probably yellow Katakuri, just because Katakuri is the only deck that can kind of play this matchup differently. Without going too much into it, basically they can trash your life with Big Mom, so they can avoid attacking you if possible. Any other deck that really avoids attacking you until they play big monsters, it doesn't really work out as well, unless they can trash your life too. But yeah, Boodle is only really good against Katakuri or like any yellow decks in general.
Okay, got it. I think that's pretty good generalization. I did want to talk about some decks may play like a Red Rock or 3000 Worlds. Is there ever really a world where you think that actually might be an idea, or is that just these are just better options to win to help with your win condition?
Yeah, so those are like more options if you go for like a more controlled Nami build, like if you're playing like Nojikos or Silver Kings, where you want to bounce back your opponent's cards and for them to never have a board. And that was like the first version of Nami I tried playing. I played a lot of like the bounce back cards, like Nojiko, just to make sure that they can only tackle their leader. And that works well, except it plays more like a regular deck where you really rely to see all cards on curve. Like you have to make sure you see Nojiko early. You have to make sure you see Soga King on curve or Red Rock on curve. And then if you don't see it when you need it, then it's just useless cards at the end of the game. Whereas this build, where you can see any card and you'd be happy to see it throughout the game, and you're not really reliant on seeing stuff on curve.
Okay.
So I don't really like those cards in that sense. And also, those cards are really good against slower matchups where they have big bodies, and those aren't the matchups you're worried about. You're worried about decks beating you too quickly.
Okay, got it. I think that's really smart and really insightful. So great. With that, actually, let's just jump right into some thoughts and some stylistic differences. I think the only big one I can think of is choosing to go first or second. Does that ever matter on any matchup, you think?
I think not really. You just want to take away the curve that your opponent wants. Like if they're category, you take away their second. If they're like I'm trying to think of a deck that goes first. Even like Zoro likes to go first, so maybe you want to take away first. Even though I still like going second there. Most of the time you'll go second with this deck just because you get the extra card draw. So that's technically one card closer to finishing. But sometimes you want to go first because even though you get the extra card draw, it's offset by the fact that your opponent gets to attack first at 3 down. So that their attack is basically taking away your card anyway. So sometimes you just want to go first just to take away their curve. I think some decks I like to go first are like the yellow Yamato or Crocodile likes to go first, but not against your deck because they want to get Mihawk on curve. But
Yeah,
you don't care about that.
I think it's generally like if people have like a 5 Dawn good curve that have a good 5 Dawn curve play. Got it. Yeah, and it makes sense. You want to deck out. If you can go second, you draw an extra card, which not only helps you defensively, it helps you with your win conditions. So
yep,
that makes a lot of sense. I'm trying to think if there's any. No, there would be any. And most decks are probably going to try to take second away from you, generally. Right. So at least half the time you're going to go second. Hopefully, when you roll your die.
Yeah.
So that makes sense. Okay. With that too, I wanted to ask about mulligans and what should you be generally mulliganing here for?
Yeah. So generally, like matchup dependent, you don't really care what matchup it's in. You want to see either Kaya or Pilaf or both, preferably Kaya. So Kaya is kind of like your starter. Like every deck has a searcher, and then your searcher is basically Kaya because you get to kind of thin in deck and find the cards you want. If you don't see a Kaya, a nice second mulligan hand would be like Buggy into Pilaf. Basically, you want a turn 1 turn, which is like the Buggy, and then Pilaf is the best card going second. Other than that, like if you don't see Kaya, you don't see Pilaf, the other thing you need to be wary of is how many triggers your mulligan hand has. If you have like 4 triggers, like 4 Impel Down All-Stars or Desert Spadas, that might be a hand you want to mulligan because the thing with this mulligan is that whatever you mulligan directly affects what you get in life as well. So you have to keep in mind, like if you have too many Impel Down All-Stars, then you might want to mulligan just because you can have those in life instead.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. There are a lot of trigger cards in this, and I think that's a really good generic thing for most decks these days with how many triggers they play. And if you have a lot of, if even if you have like a really good card in your hand, if you have too many triggers in your hand, it might be worth just a mulligan. That's kind of a greedy thing too. If let's say you had like a
Right.
really good hand, but it's like all triggers, might be fine.
Right. Yeah, and
So
then depending on the matchup, you can be greedier, or you might want to save her mulligan.
yeah, got it. I find when I play against Nami, if they ever see a Sanji's peel off early, it usually spells bad news for the oppo if you're against it. So
Right.
yeah, because they just curve out really well. Okay, got it. What would you say a first few turns would look like as Nami? What are you trying to do your very first few turns?
Yeah. So this deck curves out pretty easily. Your first turn, no matter where you go first or second, you want to play a Kaya, preferably. If you can't play Kaya, then you want to play a Buggy. Kaya is like obviously draw two, discard two, so that's technically milling two. But Buggy, if he doesn't whiff, that's technically milling one because you're adding one card to your hand and making your deck one card shorter.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a pretty easy turn one. Turn two, the best card would be to play Pilaf because even if you're 3 or 4 Dawn, you can just play it. If you don't have Pilaf, then obviously another Kaya or another Buggy, or if you're really greedy, you can play Brickfist into your Kaya and then play your Kaya again, or keep your Kaya in hand if you're scared of it getting popped. That's a little bit greedier because when you use Brickfist, that means you're going -1 now. You just lost a card, and you didn't profit there. But if it's like a slow matchup where you're not really concerned about that, then you can do that. Other than that, you generally want to leave at least one Dawn up, unless your leader can attack, like Rebecca or Vivi. But you want to leave that one Dawn up to play something like a Gavel or a Rubber Band of Doom,
Mm-hmm.
just so you can continue milling while you're countering out.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. God, that
Yeah,
makes
and
a
then
lot of sense. I
yep.
is most of this deck kind of reactionary from when your opponent's going to swing. That I feel like this deck does successfully requires a lot of knowledge of how your opponent's going to attack. What would you think about that?
Yep, that's exactly right. You have to know how much Dawn to leave up, and depending on how much characters your opponent has, or like if what they want to do. Like if you see that they're playing like Whitebeard, and you
Mm-hmm.
know like they're going to 4 Dawn, you know that they're most likely either going to swing like 9K, which you can't do anything about, or they're going to swing like 6K. So you want to leave one Dawn up for Rubber Band. You want to like knowing how other decks operate is really important for Nami. Other than that, yeah, I would say reactionary like play is really important. And that's like the basic of Nami. Like you have to know how to counter. The next
Mm-hmm.
step of that it would be like proactive um kind of play. Like
Mm-hmm.
you have to do self milling enough for yourself
Mm-hmm.
to a level where you're so comfortable countering out. And that's kind of like the line you teeter. It's like a very risky. Like you're using a lot of con or Dawn and using a lot of counters or cards, but then you leave up like the minimum amount you need to counter out.
Okay. Got it. Yeah. And then with that, after like the first few turns, I guess there actually should be kind of like a middle game. I actually don't have a middle game section for this kind of thing, right? But
Right.
for the middle of the game, I mean, I guess you're just kind of aiming for going to late game, right? And I mean, I'm trying to think how would you kind of set up a middle of the game, and how would you react to your opponents? What I think most opponents are just kind of trying to build tall on you. That's their generic strategy, or they're going to be swinging very, very wide, low to the ground. But I guess that requires them to either have tempo or either have big cards to play. Um, I guess it's sort of like a what if scenario if they don't attack and just play big cards and wait for dawn to go down. I guess you have to be aggressive with self milling if you think they're
Yep.
going to do that.
Yeah. So that's part of the kind of like proactive play I was talking about, where if you see that they're not attacking you a lot, they're just waiting till they get a lot of Dawn, then that's when you need to do like proactive milling, like you said, with Zeph or Brickfist or like Mordekaias or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the worst feeling as Nami you can have is like leaving too much Dawn and then not being able to use any of it, or like
Mm-hmm.
not a lot of it. Like if you leave a 6 Dawn, your opponent doesn't attack you at all. That's 6 Dawn that you could have used to mill yourself out.
Mm-hmm.
And then like the other hand of that, if you don't leave enough Dawn, then that means you just took a life because you didn't leave enough Dawn. That's like the kind of the balance you need to find that you'll learn through like reps with the deck. That's why the most important thing with this deck is just learn reps with it. Not only playing Nami, but also
Mm-hmm.
playing other decks too.
Yeah,
Like
sure. Yeah.
yeah, and then the only way the middle game kind of changes, like generally you're doing the same thing. You're just doing Pilas, Kais, whatever, just to
Mm-hmm.
self mill. But the only time that would ever change is if you think a Zeph can stick. So Zeph doesn't stick in most matchups,
He doesn't.
but
Yeah.
yeah, but if you play him and your opponent needs to spend Dawn to answer him, that also benefits you because that's less
Mhm.
Don they can attach to their characters.
Exactly, yeah. Okay, that makes sense. I guess that's one thing that can come up as a Zeph sticking and then hitting, but your opponent has to kind of let that happen, right? So that's not going to be often, but I guess if you just play Zeph like a character that just actually puts a card to your hand, right?
Mhm.
And then mills at the same time. If you just pretend it's like that and then use Zeph if they make a mistake, but one thing I didn't really think about until recently when I was playing Nami is actually a little bit of memorization with the bottom of your deck because you're going to play a couple buggies, at least two or so, and maybe even a desert spotted at the bottom as well, right? And that's going to be the end of your deck, which actually might spell out like, oh, I can definitely win the game if I see down to like the last 8 cards and I have this much done because I know I'll be able to mill all of that out. So,
Right.
is there like a lot of planning that goes around with those, I guess, searches and bottom decks?
Yeah,
Um,
so like if you're like super advanced with the deck, which I'm not even, you can like literally memorize all of the searches you did, which takes a lot of
mhm,
manpower if you do like multiple buggy searches. But generally, when I do the buggy searches, I just put the cards that I want to see next at the top, and then the cards I don't want to see at the bottom.
mhm,
I also keep in mind how many good cards are there that like can trigger. Like I
mhm,
see how many Pilafs are there, or Spadas, or
mhm,
the All Stars, because then that affects how I play. Like if I know my last life is a draw two, I can play around that and then
mhm.
just build my deck up to like 2 cards left.
Makes a lot of sense too. Yeah. And okay, great. With that, ending games. How what would the end of a game generally look like? And what's your kind of thought process of where is the end game point of Nami when you're winning games?
Yeah, so I would say if you can end the game on your turn with like 8 cards left, that's you can win on that turn most likely. So to get to that point when you're at the kind of like 15 to 8 cards left in deck, that's when you have to make sure you survive.
Mhm,
And this is like when your opponent usually built up a board as well. So you want to leave up a lot of Dawn for like Death Wings or Love Beams to continually counter and draw
mhm,
at the same time. You don't want to be stuck with like 8 cards left in deck with 1 card in hand. You're probably not going to be able to mill out. So you need to remain healthy. You need to remain high in life. And then at that point, it's just kind of a math game. You need to see your opponent's characters and their leader, or see how much they're going to attack with, and then leave enough down for that. And again, like you don't want to leave too much down. You don't want to leave too little down. But at this point, when you're in the end game, it's okay if you leave up too much down, just because
mhm.
you want to make sure you don't take life unnecessarily.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, that makes sense. I guess a lot of it's reactionary. I
Yeah.
find whenever I see a death wink, like they search out a death wink, it ends up being really detrimental and I play around that, and it's so difficult to play around Deathwing. It's such a huge counter and a huge swing of things. No
Right.
matter no matter what you do. And I guess it's kind of a reminder to people as well. It doesn't matter on the last attack either. If they go to the end game turn and they have to attack you, as long as you go down to 0 life, even if you didn't have enough counter to counter out the attack, you deck out, you lose. Even if the attack was to go through.
Right. And that's
So
one thing too. Yeah, like if you're at 1 life and you can defend that last life, but you know the next turn anyway, I just take that life anyway, just so I know exactly all the cards I'm working
mhm,
with and like how much
yeah.
cards left in deck.
I, I
Yeah, so like, you
this
usually want to win when you're 0 life.
Yeah, this one thing I like about this deck, it's actually, I mean, other than the early curve, it's actually consistent. You will go through your whole deck, right?
Yeah.
You will see every single card
Yeah.
every,
Yeah.
in your deck. So it's pretty consistent. So you have a good idea. I think a good amount of playing around and memorization can go a long way,
Right.
especially with how that goes. So however people do, especially, I mean, only takes a few searches for you to know what every card in your deck, really.
Exactly. Yeah. I
Especially
actually
with
had one game
milling.
one time when I went against Whitebeard, and I knew that my last life was Deathwing because I counted my trash. I saw 3,
Hmm.
and I knew the last 5 cards of my deck. I was like, okay, this card is definitely or Deathwing. So
Hmm.
then he swung it with his leader, and then I bounced back like a Thatch or something
Yeah.
because like you play around it.
Yeah. I mean, you have to play around your win cons too, but that was really, that's big, right? That's huge,
Yeah.
especially if it has a very impactful counter. Most of the time, you'll count out and like, oh, I know it's a 1K. But
Right.
if you know if you know it's like the best card in your deck, then that's pretty
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
So great. That's awesome. Let's go a little bit into matchups. If you have any opinion on matchups, I actually always like to start with the mirror.
Mm. Yeah, so the mirror, honestly, there's not much you can do about it. It's just you're not attacking each other. It's just whoever sees better, honestly, unless one person like absolutely like misplays or something.
Hmm.
So this is one of the reasons why I like playing Apis, because Apis is great in the mirror. She can usually you don't want to discard 2 cards just to add 1 card with Apis.
Hmm.
But she can grab your great. But in the mirror, you're both of you guys have so many cards in hand that you're not worried about discarding two. And she can grab
Hmm.
like your Kayas and your Pilops.
Yeah.
But other than that, yeah, just a lot of self milling like Kaya into Zev or
Hmm.
Brickfist, and then you just not attacking each other.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see a weird world where if your opponent makes a mistake, you can potentially start zeffing them,
Yeah,
but that's like the thing is having a Zeph on the field forces your opponent to actually leave counter up, right?
right, exactly. Yeah, it's
Um,
just the threat of that. But then on the other hand, like how much Don do you put in your Zeph to not leave yourself wide open if they have a Zeph as well? It's a very, like
oh,
yeah, it's a very like thin balancing act that you have to
hmm,
do. And it's generally riskier because if you attack your Zeph and it doesn't go through, you're just letting them use like your Gavels or your all their counters to mill faster.
yeah, you're right. Yeah, if they have any Dawn up, I don't think you do it, but
Right.
maybe it forces them just to keep a Dawn up so they can't start self milling. I think
Yep.
maybe that's a Nami metagame that's no one's really explored, but okay. I think I like that Nami metagame thought. So, Whitebeard. What's your thoughts about playing against Whitebeard?
Yeah, so ironically, I think in the East, Whitebeard is assumed to be a good matchup for Nami. And while it's in the West, it's a bad matchup. And honestly, it comes down to the restrictions. The restrictions of Marco, Radbeam, and Whitebeard made Newgate a much slower deck.
Hmm.
If you're playing those cards, like by the time you get to play 9 Gate, I'm probably already almost milled out my deck.
Hmm.
Marco is not a threat, and then Radbeam is not a threat either. So then the Eastern Wiper decks are a lot slower. Whereas in the West, they play stuff like Rush Luffy or they play more copies of Rush Ace, and they're a lot more
Hmm.
faster paced, and that kind of flips it. And now it's a unfavorable matchup for Nami.
Hmm.
But there are still ways you can win. So one thing to know about this is like your Zeph is useless here. Like don't bother using your Zeph. Like don't get trapped because you're never gonna get a hit off his life. And if you use it to bounce back your Kaya, you just basically spent 5 Dawn to bounce back your Kaya, whereas a
Okay.
Breakfast basically does the same thing. But yeah, this is just a race. The most important card here probably is Deathwing, just because they're gonna be attacking you a lot. So you need to make sure that you always have one Deathwing. You know, if you go down 0 in hand, use a Deathwing, and then hopefully you'll look or search into another Deathwing with a buggy or something. So with Whitebeard, usually the times I beat him are the times I get like 2 or 3 procs up Deathwing and draw 2 off of them.
Mhm. Okay, got it. Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And then I guess always go second here.
Yep.
But again, Whitebeard's fast, and you just got to play around them being fast. So okay.
Yeah. Yeah. As long as they don't see Rush Luffy, if they see like multiples of Rush Luffy's,
Hmm.
then that becomes like a really hard matchup for you.
Yeah, yeah. Next matchup is Law. What do you think about the Law matchup?
Yeah. So Law is, I think, by far the worst matchup for Nami, just because they can go so wide and so quick. And
Hmm.
then all of your effects, usually you can slow down some matchups with like Zeph or Brickfist to bounce back their 3 costs or 4 costs. That doesn't do anything against Law because they're just going to replay them for like free off of like a 5 cost Law.
Hmm.
And but you know, like I said, there is also like Nami as a deck can beat anything just off of the fact that you can get so many life triggers that kind of flip unfavorable matchups into favorable matchups.
Hmm.
But yeah, in general, this matchup you kind of want to play Zeph, but use him as kind of a board control tool. Since you're not attacking Law, they're really dependent on seeing their Namis or Bonnies or the
Hmm.
Dons to refill their hand. And if they play Rush Zoro and swing at them, you can try to swing over it just to get out more cards out of their hand. And then I like
Hmm.
using Zep for that as well, just to keep swinging over their board.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's really smart. I would say too. I mean, it's really funny you say this is by far Law's by far like the hardest matchup, but that's everyone's thought process. Law's everyone's hardest matchup. Even Law as they lose to themselves, right? Most of the
Yeah,
time, in my opinion. So
yeah.
I
And
mean,
OP04 is a little bit harder because they play Sanji, so even if you're starving of life, they can just take
yeah.
their own life with
Even
Sanji.
yeah, and yeah, on top of that, even Newgate plays Sanji. So Sanji's
Yep.
one of those cards that's teched specifically against Nami. But
Mm-hmm. Or please.
generally you just gotta figure that out, I suppose. So great. With that, we'll go into the next one. It's actually Katakuri.
Yeah.
Katakuri.
So Katakuri is one of the weirdest matchups just because, like I said, they have an alternate win con against you, which is just to not swing with you or swing big with you and not play bodies and just play the 10 cost Big Mom and then just trash your life away.
Mhm.
So one thing with that is they're really dependent, since you're not attacking them, they're dependent on seeing their 10 cost Leyland naturally, like drawing it.
Mhm.
But you can kind of tell there's two ways categories play this. One is like a regular deck. They play things on curve, like a 6 cost or 4 cost or whatever, and then they happen to have 10 cost Big Mom. In those matchups, you just play regularly, like just counter out, leave enough Dawn open to counter out regularly. The other way category can play is they just attach all their Dawn under leader and just keep swinging face until they reach 10 Dawn. That matchup is a little bit trickier when I first started saw somebody doing that. And the way I found to beat that is just take every life when they swing like 9, 10, 11K. Like they're not even playing cards on board. Just keep taking that life. And then use all your Dawn to do proactive milling, like playing Kaya into Zeph or like using Brickfist to bounce back Zeph. And then you'll be at 0 life. But then their 10 cost Big Mom gets diminishing returns. And then once they have, like, you're 0 life and they just have 10 cost Big Mom in their leader, you can counter out like pretty easily with like 12, 13 cards in hand because you haven't been countering at all and you've just been taking every life.
Wow.
Um, and then
Okay.
because Deathwing is a 6 counter and that's pretty
Yeah.
strong. 2 Deathwings basically take up 12 Dawn.
Yeah. That's that's pretty big. Yeah, because you can easily guard with a hand that big, you can easily guard out of big attacks for
Yep.
1 or 2 turns. So
And hopefully
actively
you've been
milling.
using and hopefully you've been using all of your Dawn to like actively mill, like you said, like using Kaya or Zeph or something. Or if you could stick a Zeph on the board, then that also forces them to play blockers or something.
Mm-hmm. God, it makes a lot of sense. I was even, it's a kind of a small thing too. There's been a little bit of a matchup I've been seeing a little bit play against yellow, and that's actually Kinemon. And they're playing these 5-drop Yamatos, so they have banish, right?
Mhm.
And I'm thinking, well, what if they did that against Nami? But I guess you're right. Just proactively mill, and then you actually have removal. Well, actually, no, I guess you don't have removal. You just proactively mill, and then you could just deal with the counter out the big tax later, which is another strategy, right? So
Yep.
got it. Great. A little bit of circling back. I know we just talked about Law. I think I should have brought it up after, but we'll talk about Zoro. What do you
Yeah.
think about Zoro? Is that just similar to Law?
No. So actually, a lot of people consider Zoro to be like a pretty bad matchup for Nami. I thought the opposite. Like Zoro is one of the favorite matchups for Nami, just because they go wide, yeah, and everybody thinks like going wide is the way you go against Nami. I think that's true to a certain degree. Like if they go wide
Mm-hmm.
and they have like 5 things that have to swing over, then that's a little bit hard. But if they're swinging over like their buggies one at a time, I can swing my Nami over it for really good effect. So like
Mm-hmm.
going wide is a general strategy against Nami as long as the attacks are like threatening. But if they're just like 2, 3K bodies, I can swing over my buggies or my Mr. One or my leader.
Mm-hmm.
So I never thought it was a really hard matchup. The only hard matchup would be if it's playing a lot of rush characters, like a lot of Zoros, a lot of rush Luffy's, which some decks are playing. That becomes a little bit trickier. But if they're doing that, then there are some ways you can play around it. Like Zeph is a great character to bounce back Zoros, like rush Zoros. Even if they get a swing off, I want to play Zeph again, just so that I can threaten him. Like if you don't leave Dawn up for a guard point or something, I'm gonna swing and mill 7. But
Oh,
other than that, yeah, Zoro isn't that hard of a matchup, even if it goes wide. It's only hard when
okay.
they play a lot of rush characters.
Got it, yeah. And then feel free to bring up any of these decks, or I'm trying to think. I have a couple matchups in mind. I can just bring up one at a time. However, I may be able just to bundle these to all kind of together.
Mhm.
And I guess because they're all just really painfully slow, and that's like Grape Doflamingo, Blue Croc, Queen. They kind of just have big boss monsters that play down. I think their general strategy should be going really like medium tall E, like 9Ks, 13Ks. I don't know if you
Yeah,
want to talk about one at a time or go into them all together.
I
But
can group them kind of similar. So I
sure.
group Queen, Croc, and Rebecca kind of the same. They're super slow. They don't have that much aggression. Like yeah, Croc can play Sentinel or Rebecca could play the Luffy. Queen can't really do anything. Like they have to wait till they get to like 8, 9 dot turn.
Yeah.
They can't do anything about that. But all those decks are pretty much the same in that their game plan is just to swing big at you and then maybe play a boss monster late game, but that doesn't really affect you that much. You should have a pretty good matchup against those decks because you can counter out attacks pretty easily. They won't play any like threatening bodies. They don't have a lot of rush characters that have the instant aggression. And then by the time they can play their big boss monsters, you'll have probably be really healthy on life, or you'll have milled most of your deck. So there's not much to say about those decks. Just play your normal
Mhm.
game. Those decks should be pretty similar. Grape Dolphy actually is a pretty hard matchup just because of the film package.
Okay.
The film package lets them play Luffy into like Brook and Nami or Zoro, and then them playing like multiple 6, 7K bodies is really hard for you to keep up with.
Mhm.
Um, that's one way Grape Dofi is good at you. The other way is that the 2 Dawn that leaves up, it means that your Zeph is never going to connect. So don't get baited into getting a Zeph attack to connect. And that makes it really hard because they're already aggressing you, and then two, even if you try to aggress them back, they play like 7K blockers or 6K blockers that can
Mhm.
kind of block your Nami attack swings. And then yeah, they can stay healthy. So that's a pretty hard matchup.
Okay.
If they see the film package, if they don't see the Luffy curve into like Brook into Nami, then it gets a little bit easier. But
That
they
makes a
can
lot of
usually see
sense.
it pretty easy.
Yeah. Is there any other matchup that maybe I'm leaving out that we should at least touch about? We talked about all these kind of meta contenders: Katakuri, Law, Zoro, Whitebeard. You
I would
know,
say another one is Kid. Kid, similar to Grape Dofi, if they're playing film package, that becomes a really rough matchup. On top of their leader being able to double swing,
yeah,
like that means they don't need to establish a board if they can just swing like 12K every turn.
yeah.
And that's like another matchup where I would consider playing a blocker.
Mhm.
But other than that, yeah, you can just hope that you counter out or you get a Zeph
Mhm.
down to slow down their aggression. If you play a Zeph down, they have no ways of removing it.
Yeah.
They can rest over it, swing over it, but that's about it.
I can't think of any combination of purple decks that are lumped in differently, like Laker Croc or Blurple Croc or Blurple Kaido or just Magellan, right? They just kind of lumped in together. I thought they're waiting for their big boss monsters. They're not really that wide.
Right. Yeah. Any
So
deck with like kind of any kind of early aggression is you struggle with.
okay, got it. I mean, yeah, okay, got it. It makes a lot of sense. I do appreciate that too. Is there any like tips you would say here at all in regards to any deck or facing any deck?
Yeah, honestly, like I said in the beginning, like the best way to learn how to play Nami is to know what every other deck does. So you know what they want to do, so that
Mm-hmm.
you can kind of do the reverse of that. Like one thing with yellow when I'm playing yellow into Nami is like Zeph is super annoying. I can't get rid of him unless I Thunderbolt. So
Mm-hmm.
I have to force my opponent to have that Thunderbolt. So that's why like Zeph is a really card I don't want to see in that matchup. On the other
Mm-hmm.
hand, like I play Croc into Zeph or Nami. If they play a Zeph while I'm like at 6 or 7 or 8, 9 Dawn, then I can just bounce it back. So like I know not to play Zeph against blue or that kind of thing. So yeah, just
Mm-hmm.
knowing what your opponent likes to do is really helpful when you're playing Nami.
Yeah.
And then other than that, like there's some small like combos you can do. Like one combo is like using something like a Desert Spada to rearrange the top of your deck and then seeing what you draw next with like a Deathwing or Love. Like that's a pretty simple combo. Or even doing stuff like using your Puggy when you have 5 cards left to rearrange the bottom of your deck and then playing the Kaya afterwards so you can see
Mm,
what you draw next. There's a lot of like
yeah.
deck manipulation you can do and a lot of like
Yeah.
to
I
fix your draws.
I guess we never talked about Daz Bones. He just grabs a one cost blue event. I mean, are you just mostly going to be grabbing Rubber Band and Gavel? Is that like
Yeah, I would say those
generic?
are the main cards that you grab. Sometimes I grab Spada if I'm really bricking, but that would be like a last case scenario.
Oh, okay.
Another thing that I see people do with Spada that like kind of they trip up on is like they see that they have one down open, so I'm gonna play this Mr. One and grab a one cost event. Well, I already have like a rubber band or gavel. I'm gonna grab another one. You don't need to do that. You can do that later on when you're like missing one. Like I don't have gavel, but I do have rubber band, and I can play Mr. One to grab gavel instead.
Hmm.
Um, a big trap I fell into this deck early on is I'm trying to be as efficient as possible. Like I want to use all my Dawn. So like sometimes I grab Mr. One, and then I've seen somebody grab Impedal All Stars, and they're like, "Oh no, I'm just gonna discard that anyway." But I'm like, "You could have just discarded the Mr. One instead. It's the same thing." But they just kind
Mm,
of see the value. Like you're like, "Oh yeah, like Mr. One technically adds me a card." But sometimes you want to be more Dawn efficient rather
yeah,
than
he's not really he doesn't really plus you at all. You want to
exactly.
grab a card that gives you a pluses you, which is one of these two, right? Because
Yeah, like that
these
helps
ones
you
help your
mill.
win condition, especially Gavel. This one's such probably MVP of the deck generally. Maybe the MVP, I mean it's just the cookie cutter of the deck, right?
Yeah, I definitely say he's a really strong MVP just because it's a one Dawn 4K.
Hmm.
Just so that you
Yeah.
can leave one Dawn up and know you're protected for most of the time.
Yeah, and it's one thing to remember too with this card, in case you have Zephs, this doesn't guard out your Zeph. It only guards out your leader, which is
Yeah,
interesting because I thought about playing this in other decks, but I'm like,
yeah,
oh, it only does that.
yeah.
Man, I think it's yeah, exactly. And then Gum Gum Rain, if that's another option people like to do, right? But
Hmm.
yeah, Gum Gum Rain is generally going to be I mean, I didn't know it was an impel down card to be honest. Makes it actually a little bit better, but um
Yeah.
I think it's 2K is really good, to be honest. So, and
Yeah.
you said there maybe is options in the future, but generally that goes to that. Okay, got it. Do you have any like closing thoughts you have about Nami or this video at all?
Yeah, I would say Nami, like, still to this day, is like a good deck to bring in, just because you'll have your favorable matchups, you have your unfavorable matchups, but
Mm-hmm.
it's one of the decks that can high roll out of their unfavorable matchups the best. Like
Mm-hmm.
Katakuri, like everybody always says, like, oh yeah, you won off your life off of Katakuri. Nami can do that, if not better. Just because like Katakuri, like if you see a beige like first in life, like you're not, that's not helping you win the game. Like you
Yeah.
need it to be last in life. But Nami, all of your triggers, like you don't care when you see them really, except for like maybe Death Wink. Like you want your opponent to have something you can bounce back. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
like I'll see a spot at any time, like first or last life, Pilaf, same thing. And like it's just fun to play. Like seeing you get life
Mm-hmm.
triggers, being able
Yeah.
to kind of mill yourself out, like win in an alternate way. Like every time I brought Nami to a tournament, like I would kind of get like a little like laugh out of my opponent and go out and like she bring Nami and like you're doing like decently well, like high end tables. Like
Yeah.
that made me feel better too because I was like, oh, like I kind of
Yeah.
accomplished something.
I think it probably brings a lot of fun to the player, and I would say I'm a player. I like to play on players' frustrations, and this definitely makes most players frustrated, especially at a local level when they see a Nami. And I mean, I haven't played it at a local level yet, right? But I find that most players, I mean, we always say he's playing Nami, get him. But I mean, it's a frustrating deck for a reason. It's because it's good, right? It has a condition that can win the game. That is definitely different. And I mean, is it any deck like that, right?
Yeah,
it has to
and
do
like
that. So
yeah, and like honestly, like I don't play a lot, but when I do play, and I just need some reps just to keep my muscle memory up. Like the two decks I play are like Whitebeard and Nami, just because they kind of help you teach your fundamentals. Nami I play just because it helps you with your math fundamentals. Like I know how much to don leave up, how much to counter out, how much that kind of thing. Whereas Whitebeard, I'm always gonna be a 0 life, so it helps me practice my lethal turns. So even if I'm not playing a lot or I don't feel playing a lot, I just play those decks just to get reps in of like niche scenarios that come up all the time.
Those are both really good things, man. You should make some articles on that. Wow. Oh wait, maybe you do have articles. You can always check those out at Clyde TCG's Patreon too. We're starting to do some articles as well at Will to Win, but we haven't actually made one yet, right? So we're in that process. And you do a really, really good job with yours. I just want to really commentate about that. So
thank you.
Yeah. Great. Well, hey, just again, where can we find you again? Your Twitter and your Patreon?
Yeah, so my Twitter is twitter.com/ClydeTCG. Same thing with Patreon, patreon.com/ClydeTCG. And yeah, follow me on Twitter if you just want random thoughts, and follow me on Patreon if you want some of my tips. And Chris Sock is another person I'm working with on the Patreon as well. He's helping me write it for kind of more in-depth tips.
Nice. You're working with Chris now? That's awesome. So
yeah, we're friends from locals, so like I talk to him about the game a lot, and he's one of the players I think is one of the best card games in general. And always someone like I hate playing against.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you so much for again joining us here. Thank you for watching if you've stayed through this whole long video. And yeah, appreciate it. See you in the next video. Ciao.